On a warm afternoon in August 1957, black automobiles wound their way through North Hollywood toward Valhalla Memorial Park. Photographers clustered outside the gates, cameras ready. Reporters whispered into recorders. Hollywood had gathered to bury one of its gentlest giants. The chapel filled with familiar faces from decades past, directors who shaped silent comedy, actors who had shared screens and stages, old vaudeville partners, studio executives. Flowers draped every surface. Organ music echoed softly through the hall. Everything was arranged with reverence and precision, yet one seat remained empty. A single chair near the front, reserved for the man who had shared nearly every frame of the departed's life for more than 3 decades. No one sat in it. No one would. As the service unfolded, that absence became as powerful as the eulogies themselves. Why would a lifelong partner miss the final goodbye? What kept Stan Laurel from standing beside his best friend one last time? The answer, when it finally emerged, revealed a truth far more heartbreaking than anyone expected. Before they became the world's most beloved comedy duo, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy lived in entirely different worlds. Arthur Stanley Jefferson was born on June 16, 1890, in Ulverston, England, into a life steeped in theater. His father managed stages, and young Stan grew up backstage, surrounded by grease paint props and performers transforming silence into magic. He didn't learn trades or sports, he studied timing. He learned how a pause could speak louder than dialogue. As a teenager, Stan joined Fred Karno's comedy troupe, the legendary company that launched Charlie Chaplin. Laurel understudied Chaplin, watching closely, absorbing how a man could reduce an audience to laughter with nothing more than movement and expression. Those lessons became the blueprint for his life. Across the ocean, Oliver Norville Hardy was born on January 18, 1892, in Harlem, Georgia. His life began with loss. His father, a Civil War veteran, died before Oliver was 2. Raised by his mother, Oliver found comfort in music and performance. He had a voice that filled rooms, warm and commanding. He drifted through schools and early ambitions until film found him. In silent movies, Hardy often played villains or pompous authority figures, but audiences remembered him. He appeared in hundreds of films by the early 1920s, dependable and unforgettable. Friends called him Babe, a nickname that stayed. One was a thin English dreamer who analyzed comedy like mathematics. The other, a Southern charmer whose sighs hid a gentle soul. Their paths converged quietly in 1921 at Hal Roach Studios, when they appeared together in a small film called The Lucky Dog. Neither knew it then, but destiny had finally placed them in the same frame, and comedy would never be the same. Oliver played the crook. They shared almost no scenes, and neither man realized they had just taken the first breath of something historic. The real combustion came years later, when director Leo McCarey, a man with a rare gift for recognizing patterns others missed, saw something no one else did. He looked at Stan Laurel, the thin, bewildered Englishman whose eyes always seemed caught mid-thought. Then he looked at Oliver Hardy, the round, self-assured American who carried himself like a man convinced he understood the world right up until the world proved him wrong. McCarey understood they weren't opposites by chance. They were inverse halves of the same truth about human nature. Their first official pairing came in 1927 with Pudding Pants on Philip, silent, wordless, perfect. Stan blinked at the camera with helpless innocence. Hardy puffed his chest and rolled his eyes, clinging to dignity as everything collapsed around him. The laughter was immediate and electric. Audiences didn't need explanations. The chemistry spoke in a universal language. What viewers never saw was the architecture beneath the chaos. While Hardy trusted directors and scripts, Stan could not let go of control. He rewrote gags obsessively, edited scenes down to fractions of a second, convinced a single misplaced pause could kill a joke. He rehearsed endlessly, scrapped entire sequences if they didn't feel right. To Stan, comedy wasn't luck, it was mathematics. Every fall, every glance, every hesitation was engineered. Even their theme music, the Cuckoo Song, was chosen for effect. A few notes, and audiences knew chaos was coming. Through the late 1920s and 1930s, Laurel and Hardy built an empire, more than 100 films, each one a masterclass in timing and truth disguised as foolishness. Their famous line, "Well, here's another nice mess you've gotten me into," was more than a joke. It was the emotional DNA of the act, frustration paired with innocence, blame softened by loyalty. The world adored them. Theaters from London to Berlin erupted with laughter. Children learned their names before they learned to read. Decades later, British comedians would rank them among the greatest comedy acts of all time, proof their work never aged. But fame is not gentle. Off-screen, Stan Laurel's life was restless and fractured. He married 5 times to 4 women, searching for stability he never quite found. Relationships began with hope and ended in collapse. He wasn't cruel, he was searching, perhaps for peace, perhaps for permanence. In the end, Stan's truest marriage wasn't to a person at all, it was to the work. While Oliver could leave the studio and disappear to a golf course or a party, Stan carried the work home with him. He sketched ideas late into the night, replayed scenes in his head, and phoned editors after midnight, convinced something, some tiny beat or pause, still needed adjusting. He simply couldn't stop. The work had become his identity. The strain showed. By the 1940s, Stan developed diabetes. Heart problems followed. Long hours, emotional pressure, and a lifetime of perfectionism took their toll, but he refused to step back. To stop working would have meant losing himself. Oliver Hardy fought different demons. He married 3 times, and his second marriage to Myrtle Reeves, who battled severe alcoholism, became volatile and draining. Financial trouble followed him like a shadow. Hardy was generous to a fault, often trusting the wrong people and giving money he couldn't afford to lose. He fell behind on taxes and owed large sums to the government. He rarely complained, but the weight of it wore him down. To the world, however, nothing had changed. Laurel and Hardy remained the same lovable figures on screen, forever frozen in laughter. That image was so powerful that few could imagine the reality. 2 aging comedians grappling with failing health, money worries, and the slow erosion of an empire built on a very specific kind of humor. By the late 1940s, the golden age of slapstick was fading. After World War II, audiences wanted something faster, sharper, more modern. Laurel and Hardy's slow, deliberate comedy, so carefully constructed, so dependent on patience and timing, began to feel old-fashioned. Every setback felt personal to Stan. When the laughter faded, the silence cut deeply. In 1951, they made their final film together, Atoll K. The production was a nightmare. Both men were ill. The script was weak. Language barriers plagued the French and Italian crew. For the first time, the magic didn't quite work. The film felt forced, not effortless. It marked the end of an era, not because they had lost their talent, but because the world had moved on. Then came Oliver Hardy's cruel transformation. For decades, his size had been central to the act. By the early 1950s, he weighed over 300 pounds, and the toll was severe. In 1954, Hardy suffered a mild heart attack. Under doctor's orders, he undertook a drastic diet, losing more than 150 pounds. Friends barely recognized him. Fans were stunned. The familiar round figure was gone, replaced by a fragile, almost ghostly presence. The weight loss couldn't undo the damage. Years of smoking and strain had already ravaged his lungs and heart, and time was running out. By the time doctors finally warned him, Oliver Hardy's body was already struggling under decades of accumulated strain. In 1956, tragedy struck again. Hardy suffered a massive stroke that left him paralyzed and unable to speak. For a man whose entire life revolved around timing, expression, and voice, the silence was cruel beyond words. Stan Laurel called and wrote constantly, but Hardy was too weak to respond. Their bond, one that had carried them through decades of laughter, hardship, and shared creation, now existed only in one direction. Letters went unanswered. Phone calls ended in quiet updates from nurses. The partnership that had once spoken in perfect rhythm was reduced to stillness. By August 1957, Hardy's condition worsened rapidly. His body could no longer withstand the damage. Within weeks, he suffered 2 more strokes in quick succession. On August 7, 1957, at the age of 65, Oliver Norville Hardy passed away from cerebral thrombosis. The news rippled across the world. Tributes poured in from comedians, actors, and filmmakers who spoke of his warmth, generosity, and impeccable timing. Newspapers called him a gentle giant. Fans mourned as though they had lost a friend. Theaters replayed Laurel and Hardy films, and audiences laughed through tears, grateful for the joy he had given them. Yet as funeral arrangements were announced, one question echoed through Hollywood. Where was Stan Laurel? The empty chair was impossible to ignore. The truth was far more painful than rumors suggested. By the time Hardy died, Stan himself was in fragile health. Years of exhaustion, diabetes, and heart problems had left him weak and vulnerable. He lived quietly in Santa Monica, writing letters and trying to recover from a life that had demanded everything he had. When the news reached him, it devastated him. His doctor strongly advised him not to attend the funeral. The physical exertion and emotional strain could trigger a collapse. Stan knew this, but there was another reason, just as powerful. He understood the press. Stan knew that if he appeared, frail, broken, visibly grieving, the cameras would turn the funeral into a story about him, the survivor. The farewell would shift away from Oliver, and that to Stan would be unforgivable. When asked why he wouldn't attend, he simply said, "Babe would understand." That one sentence said everything. The absence was misunderstood. Newspapers speculated about a falling out. Some suggested guilt or unresolved conflict. Fans were confused, even hurt, but those closest to them knew the truth. There had been no quarrel, only love. In Hardy's final weeks, Stan had written often to Lucille Hardy, asking for updates, sending comfort. He stayed away not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Their friendship endured to the very end. In the aftermath of Oliver Hardy's death, Stan Laurel quietly withdrew from public life. The stage that had once been his second home no longer held meaning. He never performed again. Every offer was politely refused because in Stan's mind, Laurel and Hardy were not 2 careers. They were one creation, something that could not exist with only half remaining. He spent his final years surrounded by mementos of their shared life. Photographs lined the walls. Letters were stacked carefully on his desk. Old scripts, filled with handwritten notes and timing marks, rested in drawers like sacred artifacts. Stan continued to sketch routines and jot down ideas, his instinct for comedy never leaving him, but he never brought them to life. Writing became his quiet ritual, a way to stay close to the work without betraying the partnership that had defined him. Stan answered fan mail faithfully, typing long, thoughtful replies to people who had grown up laughing at his films. Visitors were often struck by how gentle and humble he remained, always eager to tell stories about Babe and the years they spent together. There was no bitterness in him, only remembrance. In 1961, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences honored Stan with an honorary Oscar for his contributions to comedy. True to form, he did not attend the ceremony. He preferred a life away from the spotlight, one shaped by memory rather than applause. On February 23, 1965, at the age of 74, Stan Laurel died of a heart attack. In the decades since, people have debated the meaning of the empty chair at Hardy's funeral. Some wondered if it signaled a rift or secrets left unspoken. But the letters tell a different story. So do the accounts of those who knew them. Stan's absence was not rejection, it was devotion. He loved his friend so completely that he could not endure the world's goodbye. His grief was not distant or symbolic, it was physical, overwhelming. He could not say farewell because, in his heart, the act had never ended. Somewhere in the silence, in the unfinished scripts, Oliver Hardy was still waiting for his cue. Sometimes love shows itself not in presence but in absence. And in staying away, Stan Laurel gave one final lesson about loyalty, friendship, and the quiet, unbearable weight of loss.